was like the Mardi Gras, the circus, New Year's Eve, all rolled into one.
Yeah.
7 days a week.
Yeah.
And you're working up there as a cop. I mean, you could, you'd finish work, you could go out anywhere, any club. Turn up at Sydney Airport, I get arrested by federal police. Mate, it was horrible. Look, the worst time of my life. I mean, the worst time of my life. I mean, the majority of police are good men and women who dedicate their lives to doing a pretty shit job at times to protect the community.
I think corruption these days is laziness. Manny Carruthers, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
It's good to see you, but it's funny how life turns out, isn't it?
Yeah, it's weird. I was thinking as I was driving up here, the last time I spoke to you, or the first time I met you was when you were at the Homicide Squad, and I came in there to do a story, but it ended falling through because the guy had put an appeal in. Yeah,
I remember that, but the fact that we're both detectives in the 80s, and here we are all these years down the track. We haven't aged at all, of course, but these years down the track, and you're hosting a podcast, I'm hosting a podcast, and here you are as a guest. So
it's almost gone full circle, hasn't it?
Yeah, strange. Look, we're both passionate about missing persons, and that's your podcast, the Missing Australia, is a podcast series about missing persons. Mm-hmm. Where has your passion come from in regards to missing persons?
Well, when I left the police, I was really fortunate enough. I landed a job as a reporter in television.
Yeah.
And I think I worked at Darlow and the Cross, and I saw a lot of, runaways, because that's where they would, they'd head to the Cross like moths to a flame. And I could see, I guess, just how destructive, the streets of King's Cross and that were for kids. And often they were escaping, shitty family life. And and then I guess when I sort of looked into it more, I didn't realise what an issue it was. And I think in the early 90s, after I left the police, I covered the story of Debbie Ashby.
Yeah.
And she was completely different to any of the kids that I'd seen at the Cross. They'd come from places where there was no love, where she came from a really loving family who were torn apart when she disappeared. And then I was a reporter in Brisbane when I covered Daniel Morcombe's disappearance, and I'd become a father by then, and that really hit home for me.
Yeah, that Daniel Morcombe one certainly resonates with people, and I think because it was a high-profile case, we saw the pain etched in the family the whole time as that case went on. Not knowing what happened to Daniel, I know it was just so devastating to the family. You knew the family, you met the family through the work. Is that how you found it?
Yeah, mate, look, the good people, and and I'm very proud to say that they actually endorsed the podcast, which is terrific. You got to have their tick of approval. But yeah, look, it was devastating. I mean, a little boy, waiting at a bus to go buy Christmas presents for his family, and he disappears. And I think what struck me is that I interviewed the family just weeks after Daniel disappeared, and from the very outset, Bruce had concluded in his own mind that Daniel was dead, that Daniel had died. And then I interviewed them subsequently, years after, 3 or 4 years later, and Bruce still had that opinion. But Denise, even years later, she still, the mother, still held out hope that Daniel may be alive. And she remember her saying to me, "You hear about kids, being abducted, and they get found 10, 20 years later." And a different dynamic in the family, and that really struck me, how one parent had concluded, no, I'll never see my child again, and the other, the mother, still held out hope.
Yeah, I think that summarises it very well, the impact that missing people, like losing a loved one. Murder is horrible, obviously, but at least people know what's happened. Yeah, at least they know they're not expecting to knock at the door. I've seen that time and time again on murder investigations I've been involved in, where people have disappeared, and there's always that element of hope. And you can imagine how difficult it is for a family. There's Bruce on one hand, confident that no, he's deceased, and then Denise is, oh well, he might return, and you can understand why they would have that. You do hear of stories of people turning up 20 years later, some bizarre stories, usually from America. Those bizarre stories of people turning up. We're talking the other day, and something that you said really resonated with me, that there was one family that left the porch light on. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, so in 1979, two girls, Kay Doherty and Tony Kavanagh,
Yeah.
were, told their parents they were babysitting, bit of a fib, but the belief was they were they were from Warilla, down south of Wollongong. They were going to go into town to a disco or something. And, the last reported sighting by a witness that they were hitchhiking, never seen again. Kay Doherty is a twin. She has a brother, Kevin. And the family lived in a housing commission house down around Shell Harbour Way, and the mother kept the porch light on up until she passed away. But not only that, Kevin didn't get married because he didn't want to leave his mum alone, because there was only the two, him and his sister. So when his parents died, he actually bought the house, and he lives in the house now.
Isn't it like it's sad in a way, but I think it brings home the amount of emotion that's attached. Because I say to people, you just try to comprehend someone that's in your life, someone that you love, someone you see every day, just disappears and you never have answers. How do you deal with that? And it seems extreme leaving the porch light on, but that's just how deep it runs.
Yeah, and I've spoken to other families like Debbie Ashby in the first episode of The Missing. Her family sold the house, moved to another home, but they kept the same phone number.
Yeah,
it's the same thing, just in case years later she tries to ring.
Always living in hope, and I can understand. I understand that. If you don't know, because the police are involved, they wouldn't be able to say definitively what's happened. You can say, it's likely. One of the case that I'm known for is the William Tyrrell case, where the 3-year-old William disappeared up on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, the young boy in the Spider-Man suit. And I still remember the foster parents saying to me, they've gone home because they were away on holidays visiting their mother, William's foster grandmother. And then they had to return home. And this is, I took over the investigation probably 5 months after, and I remember one of the most difficult conversations I had with them. They were saying, when do you think we should pack up William's room? And this is sort of 12 months after William's disappeared. Just, it's almost so hard to comprehend. At what point do you change the room? Okay, this child's never coming back. We didn't know what had happened to William at that point in time. They didn't know what's happened to William, and they're the type of things that they're running through their minds. And it makes you sad even thinking about it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And many families never pack up those clothes.
Yeah.
And if they do, they put them in storage. Like one of the last stories I did with the Morecambes, there was this really poignant and really sad scene. And I have no pride in admitting, I mean, a lot of the times when I do this, I tear up because it's really, you take it personally. And Denise was packing Daniel's clothes, and he'd been missing already 3-4 years, and wasn't throwing them away, was taking them to storage, and it was like, I wanted to say to her, but like, if he is alive and he comes back in a few years, he won't fit in those clothes. Yeah. But it's a connection. Like there's another story in the series, Who Killed Katie? And when I walked in, I was in Melbourne, and I walked into Lily, the missing woman is Katie O'Shea, her daughter Lily's house. And while we were preparing, I looked around, and in the windowsill is a stubby of stout beer. And she'd come back, and we sat down. I said, "Can I ask you what's with the beer?"
Yeah.
She goes, "I don't drink it or anything." She goes, "That's what Mum used to drink." So I keep it in the windowsill as a reminder.
So she'd been keeping that for years and just not getting rid of it.
Yeah, and most families, they'll hold on to something.
Yeah.
It could be that they'll name, a sibling will name their child after their missing loved one. Yeah. Or they'll hold just onto something like, it might be worth nothing, but it belongs to the missing person, and it maintains a connection. And I think what happens is when you're grieving, people, I think, get afraid that they'll forget. They'll forget about their missing loved one, as life moves on. So if they have a reminder, an object, a physical object, it keeps a connection.
And that in what you just said, that's what makes it so hard for them to move on. And the way that, and you would have come in contact with the families. I'm always inspired by them, and I learn so much from them facing the type of adversity that they're facing. But it's almost like a guilt thing. Do we move on? Are we allowed to find joy in life? That's why our loved one is missing. Bruce and Denise Morecambe, like, full credit to them. I know Bruce. I've spoken to Bruce on a couple of occasions, and what Bruce and Denise did and keep up the fight to find justice, to find out what happened to Daniel is impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think if a family, normally families collapse in a heap, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really, really tough. But I think you could never say something good has come out of Daniel disappearing. No. But at least they turned a really tragic situation, and at least there's an offshoot that's positive, which is, warning other children, educating other children about stranger danger.
Yeah.
And they deserve to be thoroughly commended for what they've done.
Yeah. Before we go deeper into missing persons and your thoughts on missing persons and further discussion, you've had quite an interesting career. You joined the police in the 80s, and you were stationed at King's Cross, or
Darlinghurst,
Darlinghurst
and then
first
King's
up,
Cross.
King's Cross. You're a naive kid from the suburbs, and you've been thrown in the deep end. And to get a sense of what King's Cross was like in the 80s, do you want to describe that to us?
Yeah, look, I think I look back on my career. It was only short, probably 7 years, but I look back on it with great joy, because I loved it, and I loved it to the degree that when I started at Darlinghurst, that I got pulled in by the roster sergeant and say, "Oh mate, you've got to take your 6 weeks holidays." We used to get back then.
Yeah.
I didn't want to take my holidays. I didn't want to leave. Like, I was loving it so much. I was a naive kid from Downing Wollongong, and I asked at the academy to go to Darlinghurst.
Yep.
Because Darlinghurst was a busy station and I wanted to learn and everything. And I was very fortunate in that there were a lot of good, experienced police then. And I was on a good roster with good police, and I learned a lot. And I grew as a person. I became much more mature. I was a naive kid, never been away from home.
Yeah.
Mummy looked after me, and I had to grow up. And you get thrown in the deep end, but the good thing is you've got experienced police that help you. And the biggest thing I think I learnt was just about people and how to deal with people in different situations. So I started at Darlinghurst, and we discussed yesterday when you were talking about my book and that. And I'd worked out the first day when we left the academy on the Friday. We started on Monday. Paul Fredericks, a good friend of mine who just retired as a detective sergeant at Lismore. Great guy, 3 generations of policing, his dad, him and his daughter. And I said, I'll meet you at the front of the police station.
He'd just come from the academy as well.
Together, straight out of the same class 205. And I said, I'll meet you at the front. And you had to be there at 8. We got there at 7.
Yeah.
Keen. So we're sitting out the front of the old Darlinghurst police station, or standing, I should say. And about, 22:45, I said, we'll go in now, Be
you got
early.
your bright, shiny uniform.
Yeah. So we walk in, and you'd know, Darlo, you walk in, and the inquiry counter was on the right. And I walked up, and there was a senior constable with a big, mustache and a big barrel chest, and he's typing away. And Paul and I we stopped, and I looked at him, and I sort of waited for him to acknowledge us. He ignored us for a couple of minutes. And then, I sheepishly said, "Oh, excuse me, Senior Constable. My name is Probationary Constable Manny Carudis, and this is..." And before I could introduce Paul, he looked up and he said, "Fucking probationary constables, fuck off!" And Paul and I, we shit ourselves, and we scurried outside. And that was it. And we thought, what just happened? And we were too scared to go back in. And it was only, around 8 o'clock, the induction sergeant came, and he said, "What are you guys doing? Why are you out here?" Yeah. "Oh, we don't know." "Oh, come with us." And we walked past, that guy. His name was Bruce Shepherd, turned out to be a good fella. And, we sort of hid, because that was our first introduction.
It's crazy when you think about it, how soft a landing it is now compared, because I think you joined a year or two before I did. It was mid-80s when I walked.
84 I did, yeah.
Okay, well, 85.
Yeah.
And You walk in there, you have no you just don't know what you're walking into, and everything that you learnt in the academy is almost forgotten the moment you step in there, and it's a world that's so foreign to what you're normally used to. And there was some gruff characters, and I suppose gruff is the way to describe them. And yeah, sometimes why I was laughing about that when we're having the discussion, it's so similar to my experience, going in there and people just could not give a stuff who you were or whatever. You were just a number, and occasionally you'd find a good person to pull you aside and steer you in the right direction, and that can set your course for the rest of your career, really, can't it, if you've got a good person?
Yeah, and look, and this guy, Bruce Shepherd, like we became friends after that. And I think what happens is, these guys, he'd been in the job 15 years. I mean, people come into the job, they know you're wet behind the ears and that. And I guess it's a way, whether it's an initiation or whatever, it's a way of saying, hey, you're in the big world now.
Yeah.
And you can react in two ways. You can either get upset and whinge and that, well, you're going to get more heat then. I just let it flow, and I avoided him, whenever I could.
Yeah.
But then I remember one day I was, finishing morning shift, so I'm in the muster room, and he came in, and I don't know why, I just jumped to attention and saluted him and said, "Senior Constable Shepherd, sir." Right? And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, sit down, Carruthers, at ease." And I guess he learnt, I had a sense of humour I could take, if he wanted to have a go at me. After that was unreal. Great guy.
You do need to be that little bit robust, doesn't it? Don't you? Because by the time you walk out, and once you've gone to your the first couple of jobs, you're going to know that the world's not the way you thought it was, and people are going to give it to you. So I suppose it is a way of toughening up. But imagine back in those days if you complained. If you were complained, I think you would have got tenfold.
Oh, well, that's what I'm saying. And I know other guys that took it to heart and, and sort of went and had a whinge to the induction sergeant or something like that. And Shep just gave it to him even more.
Yeah, so you had to navigate your way through it. It was a tough environment, but you sort of stand back, look and go, okay, I can see I've got to avoid this. I'm not going to have the fight here and different things. But King's Cross, around that time, that was pre-Royal Commission, and people that might not be familiar with it. King's Cross was a sort of epicentre of everything. We're talking drugs, we're talking prostitution, strippers, police corruption, anything that you could get at King's Cross. That was the reputation it had. I think it was born in part from R&R from the Vietnam War, when the American soldiers used to come over here, and they refer to it as the Golden Mile, that everyone would be familiar with. But it was a wild place before it was cleaned up, and you were working there, so you must have had some pretty interesting experiences. Yeah,
look, it was as I said, I was very fortunate in that I worked with really good people.
Yep.
So, 99% of them were good people, good, honest people. So, they were able to help me navigate the right road. But it was like the Mardi Gras, the circus, New Year's Eve, all rolled into one.
Yeah.
7 days a week.
Yeah.
And, you're working up there as a cop. I mean, you could, you'd finish work, you could go out anywhere, any club, you'd walk into any club, I mean, you were sort of looked after. If you liked to drink, I mean, you get on the drink, whatever you wanted. I wasn't a drinker back then, but I saw, and what happens is you can get sucked into that.
You get compromised, don't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I saw some people, they were good people, but they get out, they get on the piss, and then next thing you know, they owe some strip club owner or someone a favour because they've done something or in a compromised position. So, you had to be careful, you had to be sort of navigate your way. And I think I had a pretty good instinct. So I aligned myself with police that I knew were
people.
Well, they were the right people, and the ones that I didn't sort of have too much time for, I avoided.
If you're working in that environment where there was corruption or whatever, you had to have your wits about you and navigate and not associate with certain people, but not stand up too strong against it. Otherwise, you would have been ostracised and bullied. But I think it's interesting, and you described it very well in your book, Cop It Sweet. And I thought it was an interesting way, and you touched on it then, that, okay, it seems harmless. You finish the shift, you go out and you go to a club and you get let in. You're not queuing up by the local police. Here, come in. You think that's harmless enough. Then, what would you like to drink? You have a drink, and then the next step. It's almost like a grooming, isn't it? And the people that were doing this, the club owners knew exactly what they're doing. They were buying their favours and buying them rather cheaply, in that it created a loyalty. Or naively, police, I think, often thought they were friends. They were your friends, and I'd seen it. Then it starts like the King's Cross. The stakes are even higher, because then you'll have these beautiful girls hanging around you, and then come in and see the strip show. You don't have to pay the surcharge.
Yeah, well,
that type of thing.
Yeah, you get a personal lap dance.
Yeah.
But I think another thing that sort of saved me from falling into that was I didn't drink. And you would know with a lot of coppers, if you didn't drink,
You wouldn't be trusted.
Well, didn't trust. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was for that I'm really thankful, because they never. I was never pulled into anything.
Yeah.
You know, like they liked me. Oh, but he doesn't fucking drink. Oh, we can't trust. And I was stoked for that. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't want to know any shit.
Yeah, it's you've got to set yourself apart on different things. I was lucky; I navigated my way through it, but you also get some funny stories in the cross, and again, and drawing on your book. But you could pick any cop that's worked in areas like that, and they've all got these stories. But one that I don't know why I was laughing, or I probably do know why I was laughing. The bloke that had the erect penis caught in the weight,
Yeah.
from in the centre hole of a weight.
Yeah, 15 or 20 kilo weight it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that came through. I was working.
Could only happen at the cross.
Well, yeah. And what happened is I was working at Darlinghurst Police Station, and we had one of those old telephones, where you stick the buttons in.
That's what I learnt on.
Yeah.
Yep.
And line 22 was a direct link to St Vincent's Emergency, because we would get prisoners' meals from there.
Yeah.
And also they'd call us because, when they narked back someone who had OD'd, they'd go mental and they'd call us. So it's early Sunday morning and it's lit up. And a nurse is on there, on the other end, and she's trying to tell me something, but she can't get it out. Like, she's sort of embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I, so this went on for a couple of minutes. I said, just tell me what happened. And she proceeded to tell me the young man had walked in there and, wearing a coat on a really hot day. And then they put him in a cubicle, and he had his erect penis through the middle of a 15 or 20 kilo weight. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, call the fireys. She said, we called the fireys. I said to call you. And because his penis was erect, the blood, wouldn't escape. So I then
You're describing it very well, man.
Yeah. So then I called a guy called Senior Alan White, and I said, oh, Whitey, can you please talk to the nurse? So he gets on the phone, yeah, and then he just burst out in laughter. Anyway, he says, yeah, we'll sort it. So he then makes me get on the radio for the rescue squad. They're all down at, I think it was Pancakes on the Rocks, probably nursing hangovers.
Yeah.
The sergeant comes on, I tell him, and he's going, oh, get stuffed. Like, it's Sunday morning, mate, don't bullshit. I said, mate, it's real, and it's on the telephone pad, so you've got to go down there. So they went down there, and I think they used an angle grinder to cut it off or something. But then it was on the telephone pad, so he had to come back and write it off. And I remember, because this went out to, I think, via telex to every police station in New South Wales. He said, attended, whatever time it was, and saw a patient who was in a great deal of distress and pain. We were able to relieve the pain, but we left the swelling. That's how they wrote it off.
It's police humour, and people might say, the poor person, we shouldn't be laughing at that, but you got to have a laugh. And I think having a laugh at situations like that, keep your sanity.
Oh, look, 100%. And look, people have to remember, Gary, this is way before, there was a diagnosis for PTSD and all that sort of stuff. Way before, there were medical professionals that police could go see, if they'd attended a cot death or a horrible murder, or even, an accident, where bodies are torn apart. So the way police dealt with it, as you know, was to go have a drink and have a laugh. And I remember like the first couple of things that I went to, like the first dead-ends, which is a deceased person, and some police sort of joking and that, and sort of thinking, oh, like, that's a bit disrespectful. But then I realised that they meant no harm.
Yeah.
It was just their way of coping with what is a difficult job, and you face some tough situations.
Yeah, if you took it out of context, you'd look at that person and think, what a drop kick they're not giving this person respect or that. But I've seen some people like that have got genuine empathy, and that's their way of dealing with it. And then they'll step up when it's really needed.
100%.
and that. There was like the time, and bearing in mind we're talking mid '80s before the corruption issues and all that came in, but it was a violent place, and sometimes violence was met with violence without going into specifics. But it was sort of some justice was dealt that way. You come in with an attitude in King's Cross, and you'll go out sore.
Well, look, it's true, and I mean one of the chapters in the book is titled Darlow Justice, and the story that I recount is I'm working at the cricket, Australia-New Zealand one-day game, 50,000 people at the old cricket ground. They still had the hill. I was lucky; I was in the Barongal stand just watching the cricket. Anyway, there's some big galoot in a singlet, and back then they were drinking cans of beer, and as he'd finish it, he'd throw it and hit people in the head.
Yep.
And if someone came up, he'd just bash them. Big guy.
Yeah.
And obviously
Causing mayhem.
Yeah, and the word comes down, go down and piss him off. And a policewoman, a really great lady and a very good policewoman, Peter Blood, goes up, taps him on the shoulder, and he turns around and goes, smash.
Yeah.
And he breaks her nose and cheekbone. She falls to the ground holding his leg, and he rains punches on the back of her head before other police get him. So he gets taken back to Darlow, and subsequently he's put in one of the padded cells. Because back then, if you were drunk, they could hold you for 8 hours. Yeah. So it's mayhem after mayhem after the cricket. So I've gone back there, and I remember I'm sort of working past my shift, helping because there was a lineup of drugs that they were processing. And I remember the sergeant in the charge room, he called over 2 policemen, and one was a tall, lithe guy who did a bit of amateur boxing. The other guy was a motorcycle copper who was a weightlifter and had a big barrel chest. And he called them over, and, I'm sort of watching and listening intently to what's going on. And he says, mate, take off your appointments, which was your gun belt. He said, put him in the cell. I said, okay, what's going on, Sarge? And he hands them the key to the padded cell, and he says, oh, there's a prick in there. Yeah. He's assaulted a policewoman. She's down there getting metal plates in her face and that. He said, go in there and teach that prick you don't hit police, especially policewomen. Yeah. And I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? Anyway, they go in there, and, once they opened the door, this idiot went at them. Yeah. It only took 2 or 3 minutes, but they beat the complete shit out of him. Yeah. Right? And I remember going there and, a few minutes later opening the thing, and he's there lying, bleeding and black and blue, lying in a pile on the thing. And I remember a couple of nights later, I'm working with someone on my shift, a guy called Norm, probably the best street cop I ever worked with. And I told him the story, and I said, Norm, you can't do that. They bashed him and that. And he said, well, he used to call me champion. He said, well, let me tell you this, champion. He said, that guy, nothing happens. He goes to court, gets bail. Yeah. He's at the pub talking to his mates. What's he going to say? I said, I don't know. He's going to brag that he flogged some cop and become a big hero. His mates will think it's okay. He said, when his mates see him and he's black and blue and his nose is spread across his face, do you think he's going to brag? Do you think they'll think twice about hitting a policeman? Yeah. And I got the point of it, and he was right, because if you have no issue with attacking police, and a policewoman we're talking about, then what protection do normal members of the public have? Yeah. Of course, you can't do that today. You can't.
Well, it seems so foreign in concept today. But back then, if you told that story, everyone would expect that to happen. And that was, and I think we often look back and we've got to realise how much society's changed, values have changed, and different things have changed. And police are really just they're just a snapshot of society, of what their involvement is. But they're at the sharp end, and there's a lot of people, I'm sure, would say, they should bring that back in. You can. I can see where problems with that too, because that type of behaviour, you got to have a real strong moral compass. Like if it's acceptable there. What if you've just had a bad day and someone's annoying you? Do you bash that person as well? And that's the problem. And I think somewhere like King's Cross, if you haven't got a strong moral compass, it can corrupt you in ways. Would you agree with that,
Gary? 1,000%. And I saw it. Back then, I'm working in the hub of the gay community. Yeah. Thing, and I know, and me. I'd never met anyone gay, but I had no issues with people. Yeah. Probably the best brief I ever did, which I did with Wayne Hayes, was locking up these 3 gay guys who were going around and drugging other gay men and stealing all their property.
Right.
And it was a real good brief. So I had no issue with gay, but I saw and I heard of gay people being bashed, and it wasn't just morons from the suburbs coming in to go gay bashing. It was cops.
Yeah.
Cops doing it, and that's that's terrible. They to do that. So you're exactly right. You've got to have a moral compass, because you can't just go someone parking wrong and he parked in no stopping, so I'm going to bash him. I mean, you can't do things like that.
Yeah, and that's where you see that moral compass slip. Okay, well, it's been done this time, and then the next time, and alcohol in policing at that time, it was a big thing, and my induction, and I'm saying this, and I don't want people to judge police on this, because it was society. Society was different. We'd have a police Christmas party. The magistrates would be there. The politicians would be there. The real estate agents, the solicitors. Everyone would be there having a drink. But when I first started, in my first week, we got told, let's go to the pub, get a carton of beer, and we'll go on the police launch. That was the induction week, and you're sort of thinking, is this what it's about? And then you referred to it in your book, and I think anyone that was in the cops at that time know what we're talking about, the cook-up night, which was, at the end, you'd work 7 nights straight, and on the last night, you'd have a barbecue and a cook-up, and there'd be some drinks had. And then people would be thinking, this is outrageous, but that was the way it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, but you know what? People think. I mean, I look back. I don't believe it was outrageous. I think it was. You had a group of people who relied on each other to get through each shift, and at the end of the shift, they still had the radio, so they could still go do a job, and that's what would happen. If I remember being there at the cookout, and and a job would come over, well, a crew would leave.
You'd respond to it.
Yeah. So, and I guess it was just a way of staying tight and all that sort of stuff. So I never really had an issue with it, but it was fun. I remember, one of the first ones. I'm working in the inquiry office, and a woman who, I came to know was a prostitute, turns up with a case of VB cans.
Yeah.
And can I help you? And can I see Sergeant so-and-so? And the sergeant comes, hello, darling, da-da-da. And a prostitute had bought up a case of beer for the night shift.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then I subsequently found out that what she was doing, it was her turn to get charged. So the vices had gone down there and said, hey, listen, get up there. We'll be up there in an hour to charge her. Yeah. So, she fingerprinted herself, I remember. And then everything was written in the charge book, and then the vices came up, signed the book, and it was like they could show that they'd made arrests.
Yep.
She wasn't off for hours, not working. Would only miss an hour. She'd go to court, get a $50 fine. It was just
that was the way of the world,
like a well-oiled machine. You know.
And it wasn't for all this involvement. It wasn't just police involved. There was an interesting part in the book. The judge, and for obvious reasons, not mentioning names, but a judge was caught in a compromising position at the Wall, and the Wall is off Oxford Street, and it's a location where male prostitutes, usually young male prostitutes, would be standing on the wall, and clients would just drive up, and they'd get in the car and do their trade. And there was a judge that was caught on a patrol. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Just a compromise. And it's a story that I heard and sort of researched, and he was pulled over by some plainclothes guys. I don't know whether they were consorters or someone else. And someone that had been giving police maybe a hard time, and he was caught in a compromising position with a young teenage boy. I guess the inference was that that was held against him. That he may have been blackmailed, and there was. I mean, that came out in the Royal Commission. You mentioned the Royal Commission with a particular judge who'd been caught down at Wynyard Station a number of times, and of course, that's his personal life, right? So, but the problem with that is if you had rogue police grabbing him and blackmailing him, then it becomes an issue.
He becomes compromised, and that. Yeah, so it was a seedy world. And look, we've highlighted the negative parts. There's some great police work that's done in those busy stations, and genuinely, caring for the public that they're serving and all that. So we shouldn't just leave people with the impression it was just rogues gallery down there. There was some great police officers, but. it has a way and something very chilling in describing it, and you brought a personality to it with the young girl that turned up at the cross, and then she was groomed by the two idiots running the strip club, and then one thing leads to another, and then she ends up dying of a heroin overdose. Do you want to just tell us that story? Because I think it sort of encapsulates, and it puts a human side to it. This is someone's life. We see the end of it. Some junkies just died with a needle in their arm, and you don't think much about it. But reading that passage of her life, it just made me sad.
Yeah, look, it was sad, and it affected me greatly at the time, and I know other police involved, because I mean, some people might, oh yeah, just a junkie. No, it's not just a junkie. It's a human being, and it was just a girl who had run away and then winds up at the cross, and.
And Manny, can I just jump in? She ran away because she was being abused at home.
Abused at home,
makes it even sadder, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, hanging around McDonald's and, asking for money. And McDonald's was right next to a strip club called Porky's. And, I'd been there a couple of weeks. And then, a couple of the local strip club owners, then they would befriend her. They'd buy a McDonald's, buy her a burger. And basically bought
kid.
Bought her a burger and then had her soul. And then it'd be like, don't sleep on the street. Hey, look, go in here. I'll pay for a room for you. So they put her up in a shitty hotel for a couple of nights or whatever. And then they say, well, look, do you want to work? We run the club. You can just serve drinks.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. They start off just serving drinks, and then weeks passed, and then normally they'd call her over and they go, oh, so and so hasn't turned up today. We're a stripper down, we're a dancer down. Or can you do it? You'll get $50 instead of the $5 an hour you're earning. So she does that, and from a kid who comes from a background of no love, she gets
showing them love.
Well, yeah, but she gets all this attention when she's up there on stage, and she's made $50, more money than she's ever had. Well, you were really good. You're a natural. You know what? You keep doing it. So then they go from serving drinks to being a stripper. And then they're working till 5, 6 in the morning, can't stay awake, so the other girls give her drugs to keep her awake, right? She becomes addicted, then gets on a heroin, becomes a junkie. Well, stripping doesn't pay the bills, so the next thing these guys are saying, well, you've got to get on your back, and then becomes a prostitute, selling her soul, and her whole life in just a few months is just destroyed. And then we got called on a Sunday. It was the Burnley Hotel. And we walked in. I mean, she was barely 16, I think. And she died of a heroin overdose. And it was just the most horrible thing. And to see them coming up and being sort of healthy, and she was an attractive girl, and then they wind up as this, they're a skeleton of what they used to be. And it was just really sad. But those stories were regular.
Yeah, and that story in itself, just identifying one person that brought the humanity to it. And when we look at this, the cross, it's a wild place, but they're the tragedies that occur in there, isn't it? So if we look at it, from the outside thinking, oh, well, there's no real harm done, that's people going there. That was an innocent kid that found a way there, and how often has that story happened?
It has, mate, and that's why, I'm so sort of dead against drugs and, all that sort of shit, because I've seen it. I mean, heroin, as you know, in the 80s was the drug, and it was regular. Every week someone OD'd. And I remember, going down laneways, and at the end of that would be a tap, and there'd be like a pile, like a big pile of syringes, and they'd just grab one that had already been used, and AIDS as well, and that's why AIDS sort of proliferated, and you were getting people. Well, they were just using shared needles, and look, it's horrible, especially when you see young lives destroyed, at the point of a needle. And then and you've got some prick profiting from it. It's just terrible.
It flourished in part because people allowed it to happen there, because it was thought, well, let's not spread it out everywhere. Everyone's in this so-called golden mile. We know what's going on and we can control it. But there's still victims, isn't there? Yeah,
there is, and you're exactly right about controlling it. Like, I remember when I was in uniform, me and two other guys, we asked the inspector if we could get wear plain clothes and sort of do an operation, and we locked up like 60 people in a couple of weeks,
it's not
like
hard.
100 and something charges, right? And then we wanted to do another couple of weeks, and the boss called us in and said, oh no, you've got to stop. We said, oh, like, how come? He said, oh, because the commanders out in the suburbs are whinging because all the junkies are gone out there.
Gone out there.
So, they used to think, well, in the cross, it's sort of controlled and...
We know what's going on. We keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
It's a complex area. You got into detectives. Eventually, you made a switch from uniform into detectives. Talk us through that.
Yeah. Well, I'd only been in the job like a year and I was loving it. And I had a mate down at headquarters who because I was a young single guy, I thought I'll go up to Tweed Heads. It's on the border, great lifestyle.
That's people. Tweed Head Station in New South Wales Police is a much sought after position.
Yeah. And he rings me one day. Like I'd only put the transfer in a couple of months early. He says, "Oh, mate, you can go up there in 3 months." And normally you'd have to go out to Walgett or something, a small country.
Pay your dues out.
Yeah, and I was straight there, so I was stoked. I'm getting ready to go. And a couple of days later, I started work. I was at the Cross, and there was a telephone message to go see Keith Smith, who was the boss of Darlinghurst Detectives.
Yep.
So I go up and see Keith, and I'm going. Because you think, I've done something wrong, I'm in trouble. And I went up the stairs into his office and he said, "Mate, you're not in trouble, sit down." And he pushed a green transfer form in front of me. And I said, "Oh, what's this?" And he says, "I want you to join the detectives,
Yep.
and, said some nice things and that. And I guess back then it was really quite hard to get into Darlinghurst Detectives, quite sought after. And I thought, oh, wow, and I wanted to make the police my career, like I loved it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if the boss of the D's thinks, I'm going okay and wants me to join, I can't say no. So I knocked back Tweed Heads, and about maybe 5 months later, the Darlo closed and the Sydney Police Centre opened, and I reported for my first day of work.
And how did you find that? Because that's it's confronting going for your first day in uniform in policing career, as you described, and I'm sure a lot of people have started their career similarly. But it's also confronting when you go to the detectives for the first time. How was your early days?
Well, I wasn't as nervous as I was probably when I started in uniform, because the detectives at Darlinghurst were great. And I was someone that wanted to learn, so I asked a lot of questions. And you had people like Ian Lynch and Paul Jacobs, Kim Thompson, guys like that, and they were always available.
And just in regards, you dropped some names, some very good detectives, and
brilliant.
Ian Lynch has been on here. Paul Jacobs was my mentor in homicide, and
good people,
Yeah.
So, and they were always, open to sharing their knowledge and helping and all that. So I knew them, and I sort of felt, sort of pretty comfortable, starting there when I went there, and it was good. I mean, I guess you have a certain confidence. If you go to the detectives, it's specialists. They're the guys that sort of get called in for the serious stuff. So I was really looking forward to it, and I was happy that I got a transfer there.
And you enjoyed your time there?
Yeah, look, the first few years were terrific. I loved it. Really, really loved it. Was learning and that, and then you were talking about corruption bbefore, and what ends up happening is you get a couple of bad apples, and they were only a couple of bad apples.
Yeah.
I'll tell you now, the majority of the Ds at the Cross, 99% were good, honest cops. But it only takes one bad apple to basically fuck it up for everyone.
Yeah.
So towards the end and that, I wasn't enjoying it, because there was a couple of people who were bringing heat onto the office.
And you, when you first joined, you said that you had Wayne Hayes, who is another person. I worked under him at Homicide, and he's been on the podcast. Ian Lynch, both pulled you aside separately and just said, "Just be wary of this person." Yeah,
well, when I started, I was teamed up with a sergeant, and I really didn't know this bloke. And Ian came in first, and then checked the roster, saw I was working with him, and he called me outside the Sydney Police Centre and proceeded to warn me and say, "Mate, look, he's a bit
dodgy.
A bit dodgy. Just be careful." Oh, okay, thanks. So I went in there thinking, oh, Jesus. And then half an hour later, Hazy comes in, and he sees the roster, and then he too, mate, can we have a chat? And he warned me as well. Which I always am thankful for, because I guess what it does, it puts you sort of a little bit on guard.
Yeah.
And so I tried to avoid things like this guy. If he worked a car A or an afternoon shift, he'd be going down the Macquarie, to get on the piss and that. and meeting people I didn't know who they were, and so I'd be sitting at another table having my lemon squash, or I'd be back at the Sydney Police Centre, and I'll go, well, I've got the beeper, so I'll come and get you, and it worked out good because subsequently, when the commission and that came out, the people who were meeting were crooks. And I'd never met them, so they couldn't say anything about me.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's people that have seen it before and in the lead up to the Royal Commission and the corruption. Like my first partner in plain clothes ended up doing 3 years in prison for soliciting bribes from a brothel. When I started, people warned me, just be careful. And I kept my distance, and so I wasn't sort of caught up in anything. And, I didn't have a problem with it, but you had to have your wits about you.
Yeah, you did. And like I think I've said a number of times, I'm forever grateful that I worked and met good people in the police. And, there's an example, Ian Lynch and Wayne Hayes, knowing that I'm, not like that, and pulling me aside and giving me a friendly warning, So, but it was difficult. I mean, what do you do? For me, it was like, well, okay, I would, everyone I worked with, I'd let them know, hey, mate, I don't do any shit, so. Don't do anything fucking in front of me. I don't want to know about it. And then, you tried to do your job and, as I said, just be aware and not put yourself in situations that could come back and bite you.
I think that's the best way. You put up so they won't go near you. They won't expose you to it because they're worried about what you do. So you stay a little bit edgy, and that's how I sort of navigated my way through. I'd make some very public statements that I wouldn't cop this or cop that, even though it hadn't occurred. But they just knew where I stood. And it is, and you touched on, and it saddens me because, I know how many good working detectives there are, and there's only one or two that, wreck it for everyone. Just the impact.
Well, look, what really shits me is when, you hear some idiot, all cops are corrupt. Bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like, 1%, less than 1%, right? And probably even less now because they've got so many things in place
Checks and balances.
To stamp it out. Yeah, I mean, the majority of police are good men and women who dedicate their life to doing a pretty shit job at times to protect the community.
I think corruption these days is laziness.
Yeah.
That's my observation of it. If a police officer is not out there doing their job, I think we need to crack down on that too. And that's not, I'm not attacking all police because there's hard-working police, but laziness is a new form of corruption, avoiding work. Okay, and this is coming from someone whose career ended in dramatic, controversial circumstances, as in myself.
Yeah.
But your end of your career was quite interesting too. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so it was, and it's something that really hurt me at the time. It's something that for a long time I had a chip on my shoulder about because, as I said, I love the police. I went to the academy, down at Goulburn. When people were going out on Friday and Saturday to the Union Club to get on the drink, I was in there studying.
Yeah.
There's 100 in my class. I came second in my class. That's all I wanted to do, and I wanted to be the best that I could be. So when I found myself being targeted by, the only way I can describe it is corrupt cops that worked at the Internal Police Security Unit who were targeting any cop, whether they were straight or not, so that they could get promoted. It really hurt me. But look, basically what happened is that I went into work one day and I was told to come back that night to do Car A because I was working with a particular
sergeant. And just
sergeant.
Explaining what Car A is, that's a car, and we refer to it the call sign Car A, but that would cover on night shift
the whole city area.
A lot of districts.
Yeah. So I get told to go back home because one of the partners is off sick, and I've got to work with this sergeant.
A detective's car.
Yeah. And so I get back in there at 10 o'clock, and the particular sergeant I was with, was sort of just wanted to relax. So we're up at a place called Barron's in the Cross, and he's having a drink, and I'm sitting there, bored, looking at the pager, hoping that it'll go off.
You get a job.
Finally, it goes off, and we get called to go to the City Police Centre. And what had happened is a couple of uniformed cars had seen someone driving a red Laser, and they did a car check, and it came up as stolen. Now, what had happened, it was stolen, had been recovered, but hadn't been taken off the system.
Okay.
So the guy driving it was a drug dealer, and he was with his girlfriend, who was a prostitute. Now, when they searched the car, they found $3,500 in the glove box,
Yep.
and a quantity of drugs. I think it was speed and marijuana. Now, by the time I could pry this sergeant away from his drink to get there was a couple of hours. So the uniform police took these guys back, and a constable, surname was Newing. He made a thing that came to be known as the Newing list, and that was a very detailed, itemised list of all the money and all the drugs
Yep.
that he counted up. So we finally get there, and the prostitute's in one room, and the drug dealer's in another room. And so the sergeant's talking to the drug dealer. I'm there talking to the prostitute who's already been searched by a policewoman. They found nothing. And then the sergeant calls me in and he says, "Oh, listen, this bloke's going to give up his supplier, so let her go." Yeah, he's a sergeant. Yeah, it sounds normal. So I go in there and I said, "Oh, you can go home. We're going to let you go, but before you go, I'm going to search you." And the police and she's gone, "Oh, I've already been searched." I said, "Oh, I don't care. You're getting searched again. Go get a policewoman."
Yep.
They search her a second time and they find a small, I think plastic bag or something, a quarter ounce of speed was in her pants. So I go in and tell the sergeant, she's got drugs on her. We'll lock her up. And he says, "No, just this bloke will cop it. Just let her go because that's part of the deal. He's going to give up his sick." So we let her go. Anyway, they do a short record of interview, and this guy's charged. I then get the money and the drugs, enter it all into the exhibit entry. I never see the drug dealer ever again in my life. But the very next morning, subsequently, it came out, he rings another detective at King's Cross and says, "I'm ringing about the 5 shirts for Mr. So-and-so." This other detective, on the Monday then, it was a Thursday, I think, got the phone call, he meets this guy at the Penny Farthing Cafe in Pitt Street and hands him a brown paper bag with $5,000.
Right.
Over the course of the next 12 months, this detective and him meet. And the sergeant was involved as well, money, drugs exchanged. And they get into a conspiracy to make amphetamines with that notorious pedophile, Dolly Dunn, who was a science teacher. Yeah. So I've never seen this guy again. Never, nothing, right? The drug dealer gets charged another 2 times the supply. So in 12 months, 3 serious charges, right?
Yeah.
Facing a long time. Listening devices would indicate that he speaks to his missus when he gets arrested the 3rd time and said, "Oh, look, I'm hoping they're going to talk turkey," which means make a deal.
Make a deal.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm oblivious. I don't know anything that's going on.
You wouldn't be included on that.
But I wouldn't know. Look, there's nothing. And anyway, so he gets, they do a big raid on the police station. They lock up the sergeant. I get taken away and interviewed. I call Wayne Hayes, who's my to be my observer. And it was really a weird thing that this inspector is interviewing me, and he walks in with a big folder like this. It was just plain paper, like trying to intimidate. And then he could smoke then, and he's blowing smoke in my face and standing behind me and all this shit.
Yeah.
And all this stuff he said, off record. He asked for the brief of when we another occasion he interviewed me twice, and I voluntarily handed it to him, right? So
This is a brief of evidence for the original charges.
Yeah, for the original charges and everything. Because I had nothing to, I've done nothing wrong, so I'm not worried about it. Anyway, the drug dealer said, facing a lengthy sentence, he's made more than a dozen records of interview and statements, never mentioned me. He then sits down for his final one, and this inspector from Internal Police Security Unit begins the record of interview by, "Do you agree in an earlier conversation you express your desire to tell us of your dealings with the Detective Carruthers, also known as Manny Carruthers?" Like leading question straight away, you can't do it. He then goes on to make allegations that I was present when the sergeant stole money and that I took a quarter ounce of speed and put it in my pocket because I had sinus problems. Right? So, yeah. So I'm interviewed by Internal Security twice. I've given them the brief voluntarily. And I remember telling Wayne Hayes, I'm going, "Mate," and Ian Leach, I said, "This prick from Internal Security, he's a fucking grub.
Yeah.
And he's out to get me no matter what.
Something's
I've done nothing wrong." Yeah. So I'd gone to see the police medical officer. He said he got leave. I said, "Yeah, I have." He said, get away.
Yep.
Go overseas. You got relatives? I said, yeah, I'll go overseas. My brother rings me a couple of days before I'm due back, and he says, don't come back, you're going to get locked up. I said, I beg your pardon? He says, we got to call you, that's what's going to happen. I said, I don't give a fuck. I've done nothing wrong. Turn up at Sydney airport, I get arrested by federal police, taken to Mascot police station where this prick from internal security is. Now, my family had been in business for more than 30 years. My brother and a solicitor at Sydney police station. This prick wrote on the bail application to refuse me bail because I had no family ties. So I spent the weekend in police cells.
And that's, I'll just clarify that, for that type of thing, and part of the bail determination would be, well, are you going to flee, are you going to interfere with the investigation?
Yeah.
All of which, with the family ties, your career and all that, you're pretty well in, guaranteed you're not going to disappear.
There was a great presumption for me to have bail.
Yeah. So for having a serving police officer bail refused, it's a pretty scary time.
Mate, it was horrible. Look, the worst time of my life. I mean, the worst time of my life. And I remember when I'm in the dock there at Mascot, and I wish I could remember this grub's name because I'd like to expose him, because he was just said, you meet the best people in the police, but he's the lowest prick I've ever met. And he made fun of me. What's your occupation? And laughing, like my lowest
Knowing
time.
Full
right?
well who you
are.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I spend the weekend in the police cells, and I'll always be thankful. There was an old English senior constable there at Maroubra. I was at Maroubra cells, who came. His first name was Jock, and he said, "Mate, hang in there. Don't give up." And then another guy who finished afternoon shift came to the cell that night.
Yep.
To ask me if I was okay and bought me some magazines. So forever indebted to them. Monday I go to court, Central Court. I'm put in a large cell, and you're feeling your lowest, right?
Yeah.
Over the next hour, it fills with all the prisoners from the metropolitan jails.
That's not a healthy place to be.
Well, I'm a cop, and they're all in their greens. And a young Indigenous boy that I'd locked up only months earlier comes up and he says, "Oh, where do I know you from, mate?" I said, "Oh, mate, you've probably seen me on TV." Anyway, then one of my sergeants, another sergeant, Kim Thompson, come down, and the cell sergeant knew me, right? Yet still did that to me. Anyway, so he got me out of there, managed to get bail that day, and so the matter goes to court. It's a 4-week committal at Central Local Court. On the third day of my committal, we have a morning break. The DPP solicitor goes up to my barrister, Mr. Michael Maurice, and hands him a document. So when I got the brief, the hand-up brief, everything that I'd given in the brief previously was in it, right? And that was the only evidence they had against me, except the Newing list. So I got frightened and I thought, there's going to be a discrepancy. Maybe the sergeant did steal something, and there's going to be with the exhibit entry I made. So during that morning break, handed the Newing list to my...
This is a detailed, itemised, all the property.
No explanation, no nothing. So straight away I get the exhibit entry and I compare it. You know what it showed, Gary? One extra bag of speed that was found on a prostitute when I had her searched again.
So
no discrepancies whatsoever.
Supporting exactly what you've said.
We go into court. My bloke gets up, Mr. Maurice, and sort of makes a big deal about it, as you do. The DPP solicitor took the box to wipe their hands off it and said that a sergeant of police, who I've never heard before, handed it to them just before 5 o'clock on the Friday before the committal started Monday. To this day, I don't know the circumstances of how that document came there. I suspect that there was someone in internal police security who got wind of their corruption, them trying to railroad me, and he ended up doing the right thing. Yeah. So anyway, so it goes through 4 weeks of committal, and you would know if there's a cop being locked up,
it's
9 times out of 10 it's going to go to a judge and jury.
Yeah.
Well, the magistrate, Mr. Clugston, I'll always remember his name, very, very articulate and very smart man, and a courageous man to make the decision.
Yeah.
But there was no evidence; it was just rubbish, right? So he threw all the charges out, and he awarded $100,000 costs against the police. And I'm massive relief, but I remember the court, it was back at Castlereagh Street. It was full. There would have been 15 police at the back, probably most of them detectives, but 3 or 4 uniform. We're all there to offer their support to me.
Yeah. It's a horrendous story that you've been through that, and it's just I don't know. I'm obviously scarred by what I went through, and I see just the way you're talking about it. It has an impact on you when your organisation turn on you. And had bail refused, and at least you got your justice at the end, and that's important. But in talking to you, and because we're talking about it, if I ever had an option going back into the police, I don't think I would, because I don't think I could trust people around me. I've got the option. I was convicted, as distinct from you.
Yeah.
With your situation, you had the option of staying in the police, but what happened there?
Well, what happens is, so you the charges are thrown out. Now, all I ever wanted, I wanted an explanation for what happened. I wanted to know why it happened, and I wanted the people that did it to me, like this prick from Internal Security, to be held accountable. Like, you can't do that to that people. And he also hounded another policeman, I told you the other day, a young cop, 32 years old, Rick Whitaker.
Yeah.
Like, hounded him and everything.
I remember Rick.
And he died of a brain aneurysm, right?
Yeah.
And his family have no doubt it was because of what
pressure.
this prick did, yeah. And so for 10 weeks I hear nothing. Because what happens is they take the brief and they give it to legal services, and they go through it with a fine-tooth comb to see if they could charge me departmentally. Yeah. I didn't sign my duty book or some shit. But, I was a clean skin.
Yeah.
So one day, I'm back home with Mum and Dad, the phone rings, and an inspector from South Region Relief, and that's where suspended police, they'd send you to South Region Relief. And he says, "G'day, Manny, how you going?" I said, "Oh, good, who's this?" "Oh, it's Inspector so-and-so. When are you coming back to work?" I said, I beg your pardon, sir?" He said, "Mate, you got reinstated yesterday. Congratulations. Do you want to go up the coast, maybe a nice coastal, or maybe Wollongong, somewhere where you just tell us where you want to go, Manny." Yeah. And I said, "No," I said, "I don't think I'm ready, sir." So I hung up the phone. I rang the boss at King's Cross Detectives, and I said, "I've been reinstated, but I'm going on sick leave." So I went on sick leave. I made a complaint. I wanted the police to tell me why this happened, and for those who did it to me to suffer consequences, right, to be held accountable.
Good luck.
Yeah, they did nothing, right? So then I got approached by the 7:30 report, ABC, heard what happened, and they said, "Oh, we want to do a story." So I spent a week or two doing a story, and they didn't just do a 5, 6, 7 minutes. They did a whole show, 30-minute story.
Okay.
And then over the subsequent, another 6 follow-ups. And so I was seen on that show, and I was offered my first job in television. So I was still in the police, so I put in a report for a second job.
Yep.
And I started working on a show called Hard Copy. I then got, it applied for medical discharge, was told, "No, you're not getting a medical discharge." So I called a meeting, and there was an assistant or deputy commissioner there, some other superintendents, a couple of public servants. And I went in there with Greg Chilvers, used to be at the Police Association, and my lawyer, Steve Stefanu. And the deputy commissioner or whatever's going on, Manny, you come back to the police, we want you back, and da-da-da, and you're interested in television, you can work in police media. And I'm going, "I'm really sorry, sir, but you've destroyed my career. You've destroyed my reputation. I've asked for an explanation. I've made a complaint. You've buried everything under the carpet." And I said to him, "I will go back on television, and I will expose this. And back then they committed a massive conspiracy. All right, there was a couple of dirty cops that they let walk free, did a deal with, right? And he's furiously writing down notes, like he didn't know about it. And I said, "Well, I'm just telling you, and I was very calm.
Yeah.
I said, "I will have no hesitation in going back, and I'll expose what this hierarchy has done." And I walked out, got in the lift, and Greg Chilvers from the association had turned white. He said, "Oh, I can't believe you spoke to the commissioner like that." And I said, "Greg, they went after me."
Yeah.
I said, "With all they had, they tried to destroy me." I said, "Mate, this is a war. I'm not going to lay down." Anyway, so 9 days later, guess what? I got my police medical discharge.
I just shake my head in disbelief. And, not going to war, the Police Association, are they representing the organisation, or are they representing the person they're meant to be representing?
Yeah. No, look, they were good. I think he meant that I'd gone in there and I was, not that I didn't show respect. He was a deputy commissioner. Of course I showed respect.
Yeah.
But I was firm and I was strong. And I think that's what he probably didn't understand. But he hadn't been in my position.
The organisation, and I'm not talking across the board, but in those situations, don't like someone that doesn't back down to them.
No.
There's a bullying nature within an organisation. They expect you to just back down, and when you don't, you hold your ground. That causes conflict. So.
Yeah, but if you've done nothing wrong, See, that's what gave me strength and the ability to do it.
Exactly.
I knew they did nothing wrong. You know, they'd already, as I said, tried to charge me, thrown out. They'd already spent 10 weeks seeing if I'd broken a departmental, rule.
Yeah.
Nothing, right? So it was like, I've done nothing. You've got nothing on me. I've got nothing to lose. That's why, I'm sticking up for my integrity.
Yeah. Well, we promised before we started this podcast that when you and I started talking about the end of our careers, we weren't going to get whipped up into a frenzy. And I'm taking a deep breath. I'm not going to talk about my situation. But look, fascinating the story about the cross, and I think you've really shown us what it was like in that environment, and the way that your career came to an end. But it's opened another door, and that's what we're going to talk about in part two, in the media, but also the passion about missing persons and unsolved missing persons, because it's something that I saw through my career in homicide, and the impact it has on people. And I really want to delve into that because that's something we're both passionate about. And I think with the stuff that you're doing, just keeping the spotlight on these cases is important. And so I'm looking forward to having a chat with you about that.
Me too, mate. Thank you.
Cheers.